Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We have another Broken Life project introduction. This is my 99 TJ Sahara 4-liter 5-speed, and like everything else I own, there's a bit of a story that goes with it. The last one of these I did for the tractor, I actually did it out here in the garage, what I called, live. It's presently 92 degrees in the garage and rising. And there's like a 10-degree heat index. So basically it's like 105 degrees out here. It appears the people that enjoy watching these enjoy it for the story and don't necessarily need to see me walk around and point a camera at exactly everything I'm talking about. They just want to hear the story. And then the people that don't enjoy them aren't going to enjoy them no matter what I do. So I am probably going to turn this one into another kind of photo slideshow. I don't have a ton of pictures of this thing. But I do have some pictures to throw in. So we're probably going to do it that style again this time because I've been dying out here for 2 weeks working on this thing as it is. And yeah, I guess I've never explained that before. How these always go is I do all the repairs first, and then I have to scramble to do an introduction before the repair videos come out. And normally I would try and get the introduction videos out on Tuesdays. If you have been following the channel, Tuesday is kind of what I would refer to as like not necessarily a filler, but like an extra stuff day. And I've been doing like tool reviews and tech tips on Tuesdays, and then projects are always on Fridays. This one is going to have to suffice as the project video this week. I'm having a couple technology issues, but mainly I just have, I want to say like 7 hours of footage to sort through on this guy. To edit into videos, and I don't have time. I work a real job. In fact, my day job has been pretty busy this week, so is what it is. That's just the way it goes. So without further ado, I'm going to go back in the house and we'll get started on story time. So the story of my TJ isn't quite as convoluted as some of the others, but of course there's plenty of twists and turns in the road. The story of it actually begins like, I'm going to say 5 years before I bought it. I bought the first car I ever owned. Growing up, I drove, parents' old cars, like a lot of people do. I bought the first vehicle I ever made payments on. It was a 1997 Olds 88 LS. It was black on black, leather interior. As far as Oldsmobile Grandpa's cars go, it was about as cool as it gets. What I really wanted at that time was a Bonneville SSEI, but just couldn't afford it. So yeah, those were, actually what I really wanted was a Grand Prix GTP, but those were well above my price range. Those were like 19,000. Bought the Olds for $9,700. This is not a video about the Olds, but I'll try and give you brief background because it is relevant to the Jeep. And it was 3 years old, so it was a 97. I bought it, yeah, it was a 97. I bought it in 2000. And that car almost immediately gave me nothing but problems. I came to discover that it was a former company car or lease vehicle. I found like a GE leasing company, like oil change schedule under the spare tire in the trunk. So they changed the oil in it every 8,000 miles, which I'm not a fan of that. And back then I really wouldn't have been. That was also my only ever experience with buying a vehicle from a car dealer. And that is something I'll go out of my way to never do again unless it's a brand new car, which I'm also unlikely to do just for financial reasons. I just, everybody has their own things. But anyway, that thing was a pile of junk pretty much from step one. It ended up blowing the lower intake manifold gaskets, blew out the upper intake manifold. All the standard Series 2 Dex-cooled GM problems, that all happened, but that car was so new that those weren't all like known all over the internet problems. So when it happened to me, I ripped it all the way down to the heads because I didn't know what else had failed. Like, why are all these gaskets blown up? So it's like, well, I'm going to put head gaskets and stuff on it. And this happened at like 85,000 miles. I think about the car at like 74,000. All the fuel lines rotted off that car at 4 years old, so I had to replace every fuel line on it. And the car wasn't rusty. It was a nice car for the most part. So, but anyway, on and on it went. This thing's just an endless money pit. I had just started college. I was working, whatever part-time jobs people work when they're in school. I had a car payment. It wasn't a lot, but when you're a student, everything's a lot of money. So like every spare dollar I had basically was going in this stupid car plus my car payment. Um, my dad always just absolutely loved that car. In fact, shortly after I bought mine, my parents went and bought an SSEI Bonneville. They still have now. They bought an '01, brand new. So as soon as I bought my car, they decided to go buy the brand new version of what I wanted to buy anyway. So anyway, my dad always loved this car, and I'm putting all this work into it and everything, and he thinks it's just great. My buddy, on the other hand, it's like, my oldest wrenching buddy is like, you need to get rid of this thing. This thing's just junk. This thing needs to go. And it's like, dude, I can't afford to get rid of it. I don't have any down payment money, and it was also the gambler's fallacy, which is a recurring theme on my channel, where, okay, well, I'll just get these things fixed and it'll be fine. Then I'll just get these things fixed and that'll be fine. And it never really went that way. But I put up with it and drove that car for probably 3 or 4 years when it was running. A lot of the time I had to borrow my mom's car, and but as I didn't have money and as it was broken, all this stuff. So basically, the thing was just a huge pile of crap. And my dad loved it, and my buddy hated it. Um, if you are a young man in your late teens or early 20s, who do you think is going to win that argument? Your buddy. You're going to follow your buddy on that one, right? So my buddy just hated this car, but I also elected to do a lot of fun things to it. I put a big stereo in it, I sound deadened the doors, and all kinds of fun stuff that I was in love with, that made me really enjoy the car when it worked. So anyway, my buddy always hated this thing. It was a good-looking car, but he's like, this thing's a lemon. You need to get rid of it. I put up with this for 3 or 4 years. My same buddy had a '89 S10 pickup he bought for $400. He finished school a couple years ahead of me, and he had to move away to get his first job, which happens to a lot of people. And he left that truck at his mom's house, and it was a pile of crap truck. I think I have a picture of it to throw in here. And after about 6 months of the thing sitting there, his mom's like, I'm tired of this thing in my driveway. I don't want to look at it anymore. You need to get rid of it. My buddy's like, here, just take this S10 and get rid of that Oldsmobile. Here. So he just gave me the truck. And he didn't necessarily force me to get rid of the Oldsmobile, but he's like, you need to have something reliable to drive. So he gave me a truck that was about 15 years older than the car that at that time I was still making payments on, because it was a more reliable vehicle. And he was absolutely right about that. That S10 is the best vehicle I've ever owned. I think if I were to ask him, he would also agree it was the best vehicle he ever owned. That truck was awesome. So anyway, so how this came down is I had the S10 and the Oldsmobile at the same time for I think about 2 years. Because I got the S10, I was driving it around almost everywhere. It got better fuel economy. It was a 5-speed, so it was fun. I learned to drive stick, like actually learned to drive stick on that truck. My last year of school, I actually ended up getting a job that was about 45 minutes away from home. So I was doing a significant amount of driving back and forth to the job. And it actually paid pretty well for student labor. So like immediately the first thing I did is I put like $1,200 again into the Oldsmobile for like shocks and struts, and I think maybe had to do a half shaft on it or something. Just paid a shop to do it because I needed it right away, because I suddenly had reason to drive just boatloads of miles. So I did that, and despite that car sitting for most of the time I owned it, from it either being broken or from me having the S10 to drive, I still put like 15 or 17,000 miles on that car in like a year or so, something like that. And this would have been like 2005, so right when gas was also like $4, $4.50 a gallon, at least around me. And that car got okay mileage. It would get like 28 or 9. So anyway, that was the situation at the time. And I'm driving the car and I can feel it deteriorating more underneath me, and it's got like 115,000 miles on it at this point. And to me, it feels like the transmission isn't behaving correctly. The thing had this weird issue ever since I tore the heads and intake and stuff off of it, where it would overheat but I had like a 160-degree thermostat in it because I was playing it super safe with it because I knew it had issues. So when it overheated, it basically came up to operating temperature. That's how I knew that that things were about to go wrong. It would come up to like 190, 200, and it was just getting more and more flaky. Um, One weekend, I drove it on a road trip and went out of town to visit a buddy, and it was like a, I don't know, 200-mile drive, something like that. And on my way back, the low engine oil light came on the dash. I'm like, what? This thing it didn't leak any oil or anything else. Yeah, sure enough, it's just magically like 2 quarts, 2.5 quarts low on oil. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. That's it. This is now the time to cut bait. Because at that time I had a receipt in my hand within the last year for $1,100 of work done to the car. I had paid it off. I had a good job that now required me to have reliable transportation to get there. I was making pretty good money for a student and everything. It's like, all right, the $20,000 adventure into this used car over the years can now conclude. It's time to move on to something. So that came much to the delight of my buddy. Um, Immediately, as soon as I'm like, okay, it's time for me to buy something decent, and I was even as good a luck as I had with that S10. I was like, look, man, I'm just gonna buy like an '80s car, like find a Monte Carlo or a Caprice Classic or something, and just drive that, and that'll be fine. And he's like, well, no, if you want something simple, get a Jeep with a 4-liter in it. Go get a Cherokee. And at the time, he had a 97 TJ that was on a 4-inch lift and had 33s and big tube bumpers and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, that's really not my thing. And that's how he's like steered me into XJs. And it's also worth mentioning my buddy's like a compulsive like auto trader reader, or Craigslist guy, just compulsively. And he also only ever keeps a vehicle for about maybe a year. If it's something he really likes, he's just constantly flipping stuff out. That's just the way he is. So from that point forward, about 4 times a day, I would get calls for, hey, there's this XJ in an auto trader. There's this XJ on Craigslist, blah, blah, blah. So like 40 times a week, I'm getting leads on XJs that I either am or am not interested in. And I go to look at quite a few of them. And again, this is like 2005. And I was looking at probably 97 to '01 XJs. And for a decent one, they were like 8 to 9 grand. And I decided I wanted a stick. I found one that had a stick in it, but the wheel wells in XJs are pretty narrow for me. I wear size 15 shoes and I'm 6'4". I'm a pretty big guy. So they weren't very comfortable, especially with a stick. I really didn't want an automatic again. The more I looked around at them, the more I realized, at least at that time, that Jeep as a brand was like proud of being stripped down. So getting one with stuff like tilt wheel and cruise control was hard to do. And I was coming out of a straight up luxury car. I had leather interior and power everything. So it was difficult for me to even find an XJ I'd want to buy. And the few I did find, they were like 10 or 11 grand, or they were like really high miles, or they were getting rusty already, and there were all kinds of problems. And this whole time, like I said, my buddy, I kind of out of kindness, is like badgering me to death with XJ ads. So this is an annoyance as well, kind of. So anyway, we're looking at XJs, and I'm over at his house on the weekend, and we're talking about this again, and this, that, and the other thing. And he had been married for about a year at that point, and his wife had what is now my TJ. So I think, spoiler alert, kind of giving you the story away. So he had his TJ that was all tricked out and on a lift and all this stuff, and they had her TJ, which was dead stock. When I say dead stock, I'm pretty sure it had the original gear oil in it. The only oil change it ever got was the engine. I'm sure of that, and that was only because my buddy did it. So anyway, we're talking more and more, and I don't know anything about his wife's Jeep. It's what she drove when they were dating. She'd owned it for the entire time I knew her. So for like the 4 or 5 years they dated or whatever before they got married, that's what she had. And didn't know anything about it, and talking to my buddy about what I wanted in XJ and all this, and he's like, yeah, those are hard to find options and everything else. And then he pops up and he's like, I think we're going to sell my wife's Jeep. And I'm like, okay. And we're talking about it, and he's like, well, it's got tilt wheel, which is one option I wanted. It's got a 5-speed, which is another option I wanted. It's got air conditioning, which is another option I wanted. And it's got cruise control, which is another option I wanted. Okay, well, how many miles are on it? And he's like, 56,000. And this is a 99, and this would have been 2005. So 56,000 miles. I later came to discover she bought it with like 20,000 miles on it. She was the second owner. I'm the third owner. He had also just very recently had to put a new transmission in his. He was part of like an off-roading club, and he took it off-roading and took it through like a standing water hazard or something and filled up the transmission with water and destroyed it. So he had just put like a center force clutch in his and a brand new transmission. He just spent like $2,000 in his Jeep. And his wife had always wanted to lift hers and all that stuff, but his was already done. So this opened the doorway for him to be able to get rid of hers. So I asked him, what do you want for it? And he's like, I think she just wants to be able to pay off the loan. I'm like, okay, well, how much does she owe on it? And he's like, $6,500. Now, in 2005, you were not going to touch a TJ Sahara with all those options and a 5-speed with 56,000 miles for anything less than $10,000. Most of them I saw were like $14,000. In fact, I would say it took until probably 5 or 6 years ago before that thing finally became worth what I paid for it. So my buddy just made me a deal I literally couldn't refuse, because he just wanted it gone. He wanted the monthly bill to go away. He had just put all that money into his, so I'm sure that stung too. And he had always hated that Oldsmobile. So for him, he was getting this trifecta of all these things that he wanted and was helping me out in the process. And I'm like, and what was weird is he never even mentioned it. And I just said, well, why don't I just buy her TJ? And he's like, well, I thought you didn't want like a Wrangler. I'm like, well, I really don't, but it sounds like it's a pretty good deal. What kind of fuel economy does it get? And he's like, oh, it'll get about 20, which is straight up not true at all, at least in my experience. I'm like, well, my Oldsmobile gets like 30. That's, that'll hurt, but it's not the end of the world. And I still have the S10, and it gets good economy, so we can work this out. And that is essentially how the deal was struck. I pretty much agreed to buy it almost sight unseen. I'd seen the thing a million times, but I never actually looked at it. It was just his wife's car. Never paid any attention to it whatsoever. So I want to say within the next few days, he brought it over. I actually was working 2 jobs at the time. He brought it over to my second job, which was like an evening night job, and parked it like under a lit canopy. And I went out and looked at the thing briefly. And he told me it had these cosmetic issues and stuff. His wife, for the longest time, just flat out could not drive. Girl got in wrecks all the time. Every single corner of both bumpers on the thing were rolled over, and both front corners were rolled over like 90 degrees in. She had doinked up the fender on the right side, still that way today. In like freezing cold weather, my buddy actually tried to open the convertible top back on it. And that's one of the first things you should learn to never do on a soft top Jeep, is open the back up when it's really cold. And he cracked it and put a bunch of like some kind of industrial packing tape over it that I kind of wish I knew what it was, because it's been there for 13 years and has been awesome. But so that was a problem. And that was also part of the reason he gave me the price on it he did, is he didn't want to mess with any of this stuff. And to be able to sell it to you're not going to sell somebody a car for $6,500, even if it is a good deal, with smashed up bumpers and a messed up roof and stuff I was willing to take on that not a lot of people probably would for that amount of money anyway. It's been my experience, once you get over about $1,500 or $2,000 on trying to sell a used car, that most people don't have that much money and aren't likely to ever get that much money saved up. So those people fall into the category of they're going to need a loan on it. And as soon as you start thinking about making payments on something, your demand for perfection goes way up. So when you play in the leagues like I do, and maybe a lot of you guys do if you're watching my channel, where we're usually buying stuff for cash prices. We're buying $1,500, $2,000 cars. That's maybe a division of thought that you haven't considered before. But having owned and bought and sold a few cars, there's definitely like a high water mark right there. So anyway, he gave me a sweetheart deal on it because he didn't want to mess with any of this stuff. It also had, or I should say, his wife also had completely trashed the interior in the thing. His wife had 2 Jack Russell Terriers, again, the entire time I'd known her. So at that point, I'd known her for like 5 years, had been married for about a year. She had never once vacuumed the Jeep, not a single time. She'd never washed it, never been washed even a single time. And my buddy didn't want to deal with any of that. But I went out and looked at it at night under some halogen floodlights outside of the place I was working and said, yeah, I'll take it. And that was that. I didn't even really look at it. I didn't even test drive it, come to think of it. Yeah, the first time I drove it was actually, I think, the following night or like later on in that week. I met his wife at the credit union. It just so happened we both banked at the same credit union where the loan was at, and met her, and I took out a loan for it and paid hers off in the process, and done deal. It wasn't until after that I actually drove it. And what was funny is the credit union was like 2 miles from, I was still living with my parents at this time. The credit union was like 2 miles from my parents' house. And we went to leave the bank. She went to get in the Jeep. I'm like, that's my car. Cough up the keys. And I don't think it really hit her that she loved the thing. She treated it like crap, but she loved it. And I don't think it really hit her that she just sold it until right then. So I made her drive my S10 back to my parents' house, and I drove the Jeep back. That was actually the first time I drove it. I don't think I'd actually even sat in it until I already owned it. So anyhow, we get the thing back to my parents' house, and I think I jump in the S10 and give her a ride home. And as soon as I get back to my parents' house, the first trip I make is to the car wash. And it's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And it's also late January. I bought this, or like mid-January. I bought it in mid-January of 2006. Wait, I take it back. I bought it in, yeah, it was 2005. It was mid-January 2005. I get confused because I bought the Ford, which shall not be named, in 2006. So I bought 2 cars within about 9 months that I still own both of now. So the first trip I made with the thing was to the car wash, and it was just covered in salt and everything else, and it was covered in 4 or 5 years worth of her ownership of it. She'd never washed it. So I gave it a bath quick, and I'm like, cool. I took it home, and again, this is nighttime. It's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, hey, this thing cleaned up pretty well. I went out the next morning and just about crap myself. I thought the clear coat on the thing was just completely destroyed. It's black, but the actual appearance of the thing was just like somebody had taken 2,000 grit sandpaper to the clear coat all over it. It was just like a gray, hazy color. I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And jumped in it that morning to drive it to work, and was like, wow, this thing's really loud on the highway. And drove it to work, and showed a couple buddies at work, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy, and they're not entirely wrong. And that night I get off of work and I drive straight back to the car wash, and I take a wash mitt and a bottle of Simple Green with me. And I, for about 3 hours, go over the thing with a bottle of Simple Green and a wash mitt and clean it up. And it actually, when it's cleaned up, now it's really not so great because the fenders are rusting and other things. But when it was cleaned up, it was actually about a 7 out of 10 looking Jeep. It really didn't look too bad. And the pictures you'll probably see are of it when it was looking nicer. They're a few years old now. So that was the first thing, is I thought I had bought something with just absolutely destroyed paint. And I, at least at that time, was famous for always having my stuff clean and waxed and all that stuff. So this was like my first true step into this, and the S10 were my first two true steps into like beaterdom. And that is a good place to be now. So that was that. And I got the thing washed and drove it to work that day, and drove it back home and washed it again. And then I was able to look at it in like the light of day. And the interior is just 100% destroyed in the thing. I mean, there's dog hair everywhere, to the point that to this day, You know, this is now 14 years later. I will still occasionally find a small white hair. So there was absolutely no hope as far as just being able to get a shot back out or anything like that. So I just gutted the entire interior, which on a TJ only takes a few hours. You just pop the seats and you pop the center console, and the carpet just kind of folds up and comes out of it. I also unzipped like all the roll bar padding, and as much of that stuff as I could. I ran through the washing machine and basically just cleaned up the whole interior. It was also right about that time that I figured out that I've got tons of legroom in a TJ. It's weird. Tons of legroom the way the floor pan's shaped, but my knees were in the freaking dash. So while I had the whole interior out of the thing, I made up extended seat brackets for it. So now the seat is, I think, extended 3 inches. It goes back 3 inches further than it used to, which consequently is also as far as it can go back. Like physically, it runs into the rear wheel well at that point. So I moved the seat back as far as it can go. People who are like still 5'5", 5'6" can still drive the thing just fine. So I have no idea why Chrysler didn't just do that in the first place. When I bought it, it was actually due for an oil change, and my buddy said, well, I already bought this stuff to do an oil change in it, so I'll throw in an oil change on the job, or on the deal. I'm like, cool. So I took it over to his house. He's like, oh yeah. And when he put the transmission in his Jeep, he also put in a B&M shifter that I guess is just horrible. He hated it. I don't know anybody else that has that B&M short throw, but he hated his. And he also, I don't remember why, bought like a Hirsch shifter T-handle top for it, I think just because he thought it was cool. It's this, billet aluminum shifter. And he also said part of the deal is that I have to give his wife the stock shift knob out of my TJ to put in hers because she hates the aluminum one. And by the way, so do I. And for the same reason as she did, it is just ice cold forever in the winter, and you get in the thing in the summer and you can't shift it because it's 10,000 degrees. So that is why it has one of the most useless modifications on the planet, which is a stock shifter with this big giant T-handle on it. Because she absolutely hated it. I'm not a huge fan either. I've kind of always thought about getting a regular knob for it, but really that's the only way I've ever known this thing, so it'd be weird if I took that out. In fact, if I ever actually sold the Jeep, I'd probably keep that handle. Just one of those weird things. So since it had just had an oil change, I decided to change all the fluids in the thing, since I knew none of them had ever been done. So that was the coolant. I put a thermostat in it, which is why it's got like 100 and... Oh, I guess that was the Oldsmobile I told you about. I also put like 180 degree thermostat in the Jeep instead of a 195. That works okay. You get all right heat in the heat in the winter is fine unless it gets like to 0, and then you've got a problem with the soft top, especially. If it were a hard top on it, it would probably be fine. But did that, transfer case, transmission, front axle, went to do the rear axle and found a small problem that if the thing was like just barely out of warranty. Because Chrysler had, I think, a 7-year powertrain warranty, and it had just missed. And if his wife had ever had it serviced, they would have found this. For whatever reason, the cross pin in the carrier and the rear axle had started to develop this ovular shape. Those are supposed to be tight in the holes they go in, or they're supposed to be a slip fit, and this one was working its way to be egg-shaped. I'm like, well, that's not good. But, what option did I have at that point? I owned it. It was mine. So I put it back together and put oil in it and drove it to work and was daily driving it for, a week or two maybe. And talked to my buddy. I'm like, yeah, what kind of fuel economy did you say this thing's supposed to get? And he's like, oh, a stock windage. And it was some asinine number. He's trying to tell me they'll get like 25 miles per gallon or something. I think it was more than the 20 I mentioned earlier. And I'm like, dude, this thing's getting 16. Like, it's getting half the fuel economy that the Oldsmobile was. He asked me how fast am I driving. I'm like, well, 80. I'm driving down the highway. It's like, oh, you can't drive those things that fast. Like, you didn't tell me this before I bought it to be a commuter vehicle. Just one of those deals, right? Like within the next couple days, the radiator on it exploded. Or started leaking. It didn't actually explode. I'm like, great. I'm like, here we go. Oldsmobile all over again, but I got a new car payment and it gets half the fuel economy. Like, this sucks. This sucks really bad. So I put in an all metal replacement in it. The factory ones, if you're not familiar with TJs, have plastic tanks that are crimped to like a metal body of some kind. And the one I have now is like a traditional like 50s style radiator. It's made by, I think, Arizona Radiator. I think they're still around. I ended up getting a pretty good price on it. I think I paid like $200 for it. And the last time I looked, they were like $500 radiators. But they're lifetime warranted. I bought it at the local radiator shop, and it's been perfect. I haven't had one issue with it since then. But anyway, so that's like what my first month of Jeep ownership was like. Is I had to gut the whole interior out of it. Oh, I also bought a new front bumper for it off eBay. TJs were still a current model then. They were still making brand new TJs in 2005. And it's not at all uncommon for dealerships to put two bumpers and stuff on them and then mark it up like 200% because it's got two bumpers and crap. Or mark it up, mark the price of those parts up. And then just finance that into the payment for the guy that buys it. So you could buy takeoff TJ bumpers for like $90. So I did. I bought a brand new takeoff bumper for it on eBay and put it on, which for the most part cleaned up the front end appearance of it enough for me that I had always planned to just, well, someday I'll get a fender, and as it is right now, someday has not come. I did buy another Sahara fender flare for that side. Yeah, and I actually bought another top for it because that back window was cracked and it was starting to show some age and everything. But it turns out the top I bought was not the uh, replace a top that I needed from Best Top. I actually bought a top that was intended for a TJ that never had a soft top to begin with. So it had all the bows and stuff, and it wouldn't interchange with the factory bows, and you had to like drill different holes in the roll cage and stuff for it. So I bought this top and was the wrong top. And in fact, I only just sold that top last year. I've been storing that thing for like 12 years. So I never had a new top to put on it. I do now. Now I have the proper top that I need to get put on it, and that'll be an upcoming video. So essentially, as soon as I bought it, I bought all the parts that it needed to be made right, and then some additional parts. I probably put I'd say $1,500 or so into it, like immediately as soon as I bought it, including the top that I ultimately couldn't use. As it all worked out, I actually made money on the top. I actually bought the top and soft doors, and this I figured out right away I didn't want anything to do with the soft doors, and I ended up flipping them for a profit within a couple years. And the top I actually sold for like $100 more than I paid for it because time had marched on and inflation and everything else. But anyway, so I'd spent all this money on this thing, and I'm thinking, great, this is Oldsmobile Part 2. Like, here we go. And then that was it. That was that for like 9 years. That's all the thing ever needed. Oh, and I did serpentine belt and stuff like that, oil changes. Never gave me any other problems. Because of the poor fuel economy, I actually took my 2.5 liter 5-speed S10 that came from the factory with 411 gears and swapped in a rear end from like a V6, like 2.8 liter V6 automatic truck that was like a 308 rear axle. So I swapped that into the 89 S10 and started driving it for my commute, which made it the slowest truck in the world, but like the greatest vehicle ever. That thing would go 80 miles an hour all day, get 30 miles per gallon the whole time, and it didn't really seem to care if it had a bed full of crap or not. I drove that truck all over the place like that. In fact, my job at the time, since I had a pickup truck to use that I didn't mind, doing stuff with, it was a piece of junk truck. They would send me on company missions all the time, and it was like 59 cents a mile reimbursement for mileage. So there were weeks I would make more in mileage than my paycheck driving the S10, even with gas at like 4.50 or $5 a gallon. So anyway, the TJ became like the Ready One emergency vehicle. It was basically always in the garage. It was always ready to go. It was in reasonably good shape, and I would drive it every so often. I'm a complete sucker for a convertible. That's one reason I'm probably never going to sell it, is because if I did, I'd have to own something else that's convertible. And as far as drop tops go, a Jeep is probably the most sense-making vehicle you can buy, because you can truly drive it year-round anywhere in the country and still have a convertible, and it won't be miserable. I mean, you got four-wheel drive and all that good stuff. So it did a lot of sitting. That's one of the reasons why now it only has, if I'm honest, I think like 120,000 miles, because for a while I had the 31-inch tires that are on it now, but the stock speedometer gear. So the mileage on the odometer is probably off by 6 or 8,000 miles, is my guess. But it's probably got about 120 on it now. In 2011, it became my daily driver full-time, nonstop. I'd actually had another S10 in between them, and I own another S10 pickup now. I got in an accident with the S10 pickup I have now in 2011, and it was deemed my responsibility, which I still disagree with. But since it was bad enough I claimed it against my insurance, but I started wrangling up all the parts to repair it myself. I was going to take it to a body shop, but I started getting the best deals on parts I could. By way of that, the truck sitting there for 6 months while I did that, I was informed that I'd be losing my job. This is many years after the fact. I'd finished school and had had a couple other jobs and everything, so I was in my career at this point and owned a house. So I was informed that I was going to be losing my job at an undetermined date. The truck had been sitting around for 6 months already, so I was already driving the Jeep full time. And as that story goes, the truck's still sitting around right now. I still have all the parts and the truck's sitting there, which, by the way, one of the reasons I started a channel, because I get a lot more work done when I have a YouTube channel to put content on. So the truck will be coming up. I'm hoping within, let's say, the next 12 months we'll be working on that. So the Jeep sat for probably 4 years or so, pretty consistently, and then 100% my daily driver. Full tilt until I started driving the Escort when I started this channel. So from 2011 to this January, so January 2019, daily driver 100% of the time for 7 straight years. When people say it's a Jeep thing and you don't understand, to a degree, I still don't understand. If you have to pick something to be your daily driver and you're committed to it for the long haul and you're going to put 100,000 miles on it, 50,000 miles on it or something, unless you only drive 35 miles an hour, I don't understand. It's the worst thing ever on the highway. Or I suppose it gets worse, but for how I ended up driving it, which was commuting most of the time, it's the worst ever commuter car. But anyway, through that process of time and ownership, it was not until 2016 that I actually had any really real problems with it. I had to replace the forward O2 sensor at one point, which is kind of a strange story in itself. But otherwise, that's it. The second best vehicle I've ever owned. I had it completely trouble-free for 10 years, to use as I pleased for 10 years, regardless of how much I used it. It was still there and it was ready to go. And then drove it daily for 5 years without putting anything more than an oil change and an oxygen sensor in it. And, if you buy a brand new Honda or a brand new Toyota, I guess that would be normal. In my world, especially coming from like that Oldsmobile that was a complete pile of crap, that's just completely unheard of. You don't just not have to put parts on something for 5 years and like 50,000 miles. That just doesn't happen. So that is why I will say it is the second best vehicle I've ever owned, behind the original S10. And eventually when we do the S10 project introduction, I'll give you my whole history with the S10s, and that's a long story too, and it's a lot funnier. So anyway, through the whole process of all that, when I first discovered the rear axle problem, I found out one of the women I worked with at my second job, her husband was a hot rodder, and he actually had some awesome cars. And I also discovered they lived basically around the block from me at my parents' house. So I was over there, and he just happened to mention to me that he had this rear axle and for a Jeep, and I asked him, well, what Jeep's it for? And he told me, well, I think it's for your Jeep, like a modern, like a brand new TJ. I think that's what it's for. I won it at a car show. I entered a raffle for $25, and it was a car show prize from Dana. So the town we lived in Dana had a pretty big manufacturing presence at the time. And they put this axle in the raffle for charity or whatever it was for. And at that time, I think I messed the story up. At that time, I didn't know there was problems with the rear axle in mine. I told him no, but I'll keep my eyes open, my ears open, see if anybody's around. And then like a week or two later, I discovered the issues with the rear axle in mine. I called him up. I'm like, hey, you still want to sell that? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, still want $25 for it? He's like, yep, I take $25. Cool. Went over there, snatched a brand new off the pallet with tags on it from Dana, rear end. and it's weird. That's probably why Dana gave it away. It's still a Dana 30, but it's geared 373, and it's got a limited slip in it. So who knows where that came from? Because if any 373 factory Jeep should be a Dana 44 in the rear, which is actually I think the only option my Jeep wasn't ordered with was the trailering package, which would have given it 373 gears. By the way, it was ordered by someone who is a complete asshole and hates life and probably Jeeps. It was ordered with 308 gears. Never, ever, ever get a Jeep with 308 gears. It made it miserable in every circumstance. The thing didn't have enough gear to pull itself down the highway because it's got such an aerodynamic limitation. It made it poochy in town. I mean, it was okay in town, but yeah, just terrible. Don't ever get 308s. As a side note, I have had that Jeep on a racetrack. It went 16.6 at 81, I think, with a cracked manifold, which it had when I bought it too, that I've only just this week finally replaced, which is what you guys will be seeing soon. So with a cracked manifold and a tune-up, I put new plug wires and cap and rotor and stuff on it when I bought it, and 308 gears and this factory tires. It went 16.6. So anyway, flash the story forward to about I think 2016. The rear end that I knew was a problem since 2005 finally let go. I was going down the road at like 60 or 65, and the rear end of the thing started feeling funny. So I slowed down and I made a turn to go out to my parents' place, out through the country, and it was still feeling a little weird. So I'm just like, okay, if I just get to mom and dad's house, we'll be able to, get it in the shop and see whatever's going on. And about 2 or 3 miles away from there, I slowed down to make a right-hand turn, and something just started going, just metal on metal grinding really bad. I'm sure what it is the spider gears in the thing. I'm sure we're just torn all up. I never actually took it apart to find out. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I drove the last mile to get to their house. It went in my dad's shop. I put the 373 rear end in it. And when I did that, I replaced all the rear suspension bushings and all that good stuff. And of course, when it got the new rear axle, that went in with brand new rear brakes. So for 25 bucks, I swapped in a 373 rear end with limited slip, and then for another 100 bucks or so, I rebuilt all the rear suspension and just stock stuff. I don't have any desire to really lift it or anything like that. That's really not my thing. If I'm going to do anything, I'd rather go fast, or I'd rather be cheap. And right now we've got being cheap mastered pretty well, and go fast is up for debate. But so anyway, it went in and got all that work. I then had to do something about the front axle, and by then the Jeep had, I think, like 100-ish thousand miles. It was like right around there, and it was also 15 years old. So all the little rubber cups and everything on all the steering parts had all deteriorated. So I couldn't grease them anymore. Any grease you put in just immediately end up on the ground. So at that time, I rebuilt all the front steering. I did I think, WJ steering conversion. Basically, one of the tie rods you can replace with the tie rod from a Jeep Grand Cherokee. If you don't know this, I'm telling you now. It's all the same setup, it's all the same length, but the Grand Cherokee one is a solid bar, and the TJ one is hollow. So for basically the same price, you can get a much stronger steering tie rod. So I bought that. Instead of regearing the front axle I decided to just buy another 373 axle, thinking, well, I'll have all my parts in the right place, and if you don't know anything about gears, there's usually different carriers, like the gears bolt to, that go with certain gear ratios. So it's usually this ratio and down will take this carrier, this ratio and up will take this carrier. So I didn't know if the 308 gear carrier would work with 373s, and as I remember now, I don't think it would. So this was the whole shot in one kit, and it also had all extra steering stuff on it, so all the bolts and crap that you might need were still there too. So I bought a used 373 front for 250 bucks. Bought it off a real young guy that was basically just flipping Jeeps and parting stuff out behind his parents' house to make some money, which good on him. But he didn't know anything about it either. He bought it just to make money. So he and I both pulled the front cover off, and there's a whole bunch of like China marker, so like highlight, kind of highlighter paint, whatever, writing on the inside of it. And usually, if you open a differential up and you see a bunch of handwriting and stuff all over the inside of it, it's been rebuilt. We're like, awesome. So, we both, me and the guy selling it, both think it's been rebuilt. The gear pattern looks really good. The backlash feels fine. Awesome. I paid, I think, $250 for that. Brought it home, um, and decided, well, it's out of the Jeep. I'll just give it a quick paint job. But especially since right then I could still drive the Jeep around. This was almost exactly the time I took my first job where I had to drive out of town all the time. I may have mentioned that to you guys before. In fact, I'm sure I did. That's why I bought the Escort. But right about that time, and it was starting to get wintertime, so I was about to have to drive like 400 miles a week in the winter in a rear-wheel drive only TJ, which is basically the worst possible thing you can drive on slick roads. In four-wheel drive, it's amazing. In two-wheel drive, it's a death sentence. The thing will just spin around on you in a heartbeat, especially with the limited slip in the back, because if one tire starts to spin, they both start to spin, and then it'll just fishtail and circle, and you'll be in a ditch. So I was kind of pressed for time, but kind of not. So anyway, I decided, okay, I'm going to clean this used front axle up some, and ended up tearing the carrier out of it, so just took it apart to clean it up, and I was going to replace the inner seals. And when I pulled it out to do that, the thing is just full of like silicone sealer and everything. I think at that point when I saw that was all messed up, so there's like silicone gasket maker inside the bearings for the carrier. Like, well, that's not good. I found that. I pulled the pinion out, and I think when I pulled the pinion out, or pulled the carrier out, the pinion was like really sloppy. It's like, holy crap, this thing should have never even been going on the road. So basically, the rebuilt 373 front axle I bought was set up by a complete moron. So the next thing I had to do was buy a master bearing kit and a master seal kit and all this crap and rebuild that axle. So very long story there, but the short version is right now as it sits, it has 373 gears. It's a Dana 35 in front, Dana 30 in the rear, or maybe I've got those backward. I don't remember. I never keep them straight. Me and my dad rebuilt the front. The rear is brand new from Dana. I've rebuilt all the steering on it. I've rebuilt all the suspension bushings and stuff on it. I think, other than this, that, and the other thing, that's it. I know it sounds weird when you tell somebody the best vehicle I've ever owned, I've replaced both axles on, but it was all just because of that one pin failing. If I'd have put a 308 rear end in it, the front end was still fine. Actually, the pinion steel had gone out of it, which I didn't worry about because I knew I was swapping it over, but that was the only thing wrong with it. And now the big issue with it, other than the small things I'm addressing, when I say small, I mean like new top and the exhaust manifold and tune-up items and stuff like that, it started giving me HVAC problems, which TJs are famous for. It'll start melting the heater controls. Started doing that like 6 or 7 years ago, and I've tried assorted things to fix that, and it sounds like more and more of the growing consensus is that the fix for that is just complete replacement. You replace the controls, the wiring harness, the blower motor, and the resistor pack, and then everything will be fine for about 10 years. And then it'll all start melting again, and you replace all that stuff again. There were conversions where guys would put relays and stuff on them, and for a while I was going to do that, and I'd have that half assembled. And then there was like a rash of guys on the Jeep forums that said that wasn't a long-term fix, that like after a year the relays just start melting. So I need to basically just shotgun method the whole HVAC system and replace that. But the AC and stuff still works, you just can't run it very long. But anyway, so that's a current problem. And lo and behold, the initial motivating factor for them selling this one to me has now popped up in this one. This one now needs a transmission. Not really sure what's wrong. I'm going to give it about 50% chance of it being my fault. Because again, at the time I bought the thing, what all the Jeep forums were saying to do is to run engine oil in the transmission. Everybody said they last a lot longer and they shift a lot better and all that. So I put Mobil 1, I don't know, 1030 or whatever the Jeep guys were saying to put in it. I put in it. My belief now is that was probably a mistake and that I probably should have stuck with ATF. But either way, it's got 120,000 miles on it. I have beaten it hard in those 120,000 miles. At times, I have not been gentle on the transmission. But what's up with the transmission is it doesn't like to go into reverse. It'll grind going in. And then if you have it in reverse and you roll the thing forward, so like my driveway has a downhill angle, so I can demonstrate this at some point. If you just put it in reverse and let it roll forward, you can hear something in the transmission clunking. As things are going around, you can hear a clunk, 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 chunk, chunk. And it's like, okay, this transmission's probably just done then. And I'm sure the clutch isn't doing too great anymore. It's just got a lot of miles on it, and I've got heavy 31-inch, mud terrain BFGs on it. So that's hard on stuff too. So it's due for a transmission and clutch in the nearish future. But the only gear that has a problem is reverse. So right now we're just hoping for the best. I need the Jeep to basically go hopefully no longer than this fall, and that'll give me time to get the Escort and the Blazer both dialed back in, and then the Jeep can resume its status as project vehicle ready #1. And I also imagine when I drop the transmission, I'm going to find out it has a bunch of frame rot, because all TJs do, or most of them do. So that was probably a lot more rambly and longer than I had initially intended it to be, and maybe not as interesting as I might have hoped. I mean, it's only a long story because I've had the thing for 13 years, or I guess 14 years, and it's 20 years old. So these things happen, but that is the story of how I acquired it. That is the story of some of the story of what I've done with it and how I've treated everything else, and the story of where it is now and what needs done to it at the moment. I will say I really do enjoy the thing. As far as convertibles go, being able to take the doors off too is really just a ton of fun. Especially now with the 373s, it is actually pretty quick. I imagine if I had stock tires to put back on it and I took it back to the track, it might break into the 15s, which isn't fast by anybody's measure, but for a 4,000-pound truck with a frame and a transfer case and everything else, that's moving along pretty good, and with a manual, so it's also up to my driving, right? So yeah, the thing is a lot of fun to drive around. It's been a really great vehicle for me, despite all those problems I just told you about. Like I said, for 5 years, the thing needed 100% of nothing. I know for a fact the previous owner didn't put 1 cent into it other than gas, and it got oil changes because her boyfriend, or my buddy, demanded that it get oil changes. He wouldn't let it leave unless it was getting oil changes. So, thank him for that. The thing's just been an amazing vehicle. And with those tires on it, it is absolutely incredible. Those mud terrain tires are nuts. I wish I was making videos, basically my whole life at this point. I wish I'd been making videos, but especially this day. When I moved to where I am now, if you guys have been paying attention, we're getting close to 2 years ago now to where I am today, and sold my house and everything. But my house had a walkout basement, but there's like a giant hill in the backyard to go down there. So when I moved, the easiest thing to do was to back a vehicle up to the back door, load the vehicle up, and drive it up the giant hill, and then just drive it wherever it needed moved. So I did that with the Jeep a couple times, and filled it with as much crap as I could, and then I borrowed my dad's full-size Chevy pickup truck a few times, and did the same thing. My dad has completely useless tires on his truck. He basically buys car tires for his 4x4s because he doesn't like tires that make noise. And this particular set of tires were so useless that I think he got rid of them before they were even tread limited. And my dad's the cheapest man on the planet. He wears his tires down to the cords. And he hated these tires so much, I think he got rid of them early, basically. But anyway, we had like 2 inches of snow on the ground in the yard. It's like, okay, I'll just back the truck down there, but I'll take it easy. And I back the truck like, let's say 10% of the way down this hill. So we're talking about maybe, a few degree incline. It's like, all right, I'm gonna test my luck here before I really commit. And I just put it back in drive and took my foot off the brake, and that was it. Truck was stuck. So this truck made it like 10% of the way down this hill and was stuck. So I had to end up going to get my Jeep to pull his truck up this hill. So I've got my little six-cylinder Jeep pulling this full-size Chevy 4x4 with a probably 500-pound fiberglass cap on the back, and another 200 or 300-pound snow plow kit on the front. My dad's got a Boss plow for it. And you know, those just unpinned, so there's this huge framework that's still in the front of the truck. So I'm pulling like this thick 6,000 pound truck uphill in the snow, and Jeep did it just like it wasn't no thing. Got the tie down strap out, put it in the low range of the transfer case, just let off the clutch, and I gave it a couple feet of, the strap, a few feet of slack, just to give his truck a little bump, just to kind of help pull it out of the ruts on the way out. And as soon as I did that, I saw Dad back there with his truck to the firewall, just throwing grass and snow everywhere and not getting anything where. And it's like, all right. So I just hammered the Jeep, and I think power shifted second gear, and all of it came up out of the ditch, and that was that. So, can't complain about the performance of it, other than how I use it almost always, which is on the highway, which is the last place you should put a convertible TJ, is on the highway at 80 miles an hour. You'll go deaf. Anyway, if you guys stuck around for all that, I really, really appreciate it. These stories are fun to tell. I kind of wish people were in the room, because then you could call me out about, hey, this doesn't make sense, or my order of events is wrong, or whatever. But these stories are fun to tell. I know there's at least a couple people that visit the channel that like the stories. As long as I have them, I'll keep telling them. Maybe I will do just kind of a story time segment with car stories that aren't project introductions. I've got heaps of those, which every car guy does. There's a ton of stories, especially since the buddy I mentioned a whole bunch of times in this story. Growing up, his dad bought my buddy basically a whole bunch of muscle cars, because muscle cars were dirt cheap. And when we were in high school in the mid 90s and late 90s, muscle cars were cheap. So my buddy always had muscle cars, and his dad was insane and would send his 16, 17-year-old son out with like big block 4-speed Chevelles. So yeah, we have lots of fun stories from back in the day. But anyway, thanks for stopping in and watching, guys. I'm sorry we're not doing an actual wrenches and hands project video this week, and we're doing only an introduction. But that's the way it goes. I got a real job too. I got a Jeep to feed. I got a mouth to feed. I got bills to pay, just like everybody. This is just a hobby. So thanks, guys. We'll catch you on the next one, probably on Tuesday. I'm going to try and keep up the Tuesday videos too, because those are fun to make, especially this last one. Check it out. We'll see you next time. This is Saddington Bear. He's our channel mascot and project supervisor, and he would like you to know I try to make a project video every week. You might be interested in some of these other videos. Take a look and let me know what you think. Thanks again for watching. Really appreciate it.